So practice test number 1, problem 3 says which property? So what do you think? Which property do we have there for the first one? Aren't these canceling each other out? When things cancel each other out, it's an inverse property. Since this is an addition problem, this would be the added inverse. Remember, when they cancel, it's an inverse. When they cancel, it's an inverse. Okay, well, nothing's canceling in the next one. What's happening here? Okay, now let's read off the letters. We have 4xy, 4xy. Did the order change?
No.
Did the order change? No. The parentheses changed. The grouping changed. How things are associated changed. That's called the associative property of multiplication. If you change the order, it's commutative. If all you change is the grouping, it's associative. And what's going on here?
Distributive.
That's distributive. That's your distributive property. Now we got some more equations to solve, another solving section. Ay, 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 ay.
We add, oh, I know.
You know what to do? This one looks a little big and scary here, Maddie.
You take the x to the third and the x to the 4x squared, and then you like put them in parentheses.
So Maddie is saying we're going to factor by grouping. Toby, is there a reason you're up?
Yeah, I'm about to fall asleep, so I'm standing up.
Okay, that's good. Can the people behind you see? You might want to move to the back if you have to. You're good? Okay. You're about to fall asleep in the middle of a rousing conversation about solving equations. So Maddie says we're going to factor by grouping. So she says I'm going to look at these first two terms, and what can I take out of those? X squared. And if I take out an x squared, I will be left with x plus 4. Now, what can come out of the last two terms? Negative 4. Watch your signs now. If you take out the negative 4, you will be left with a positive x and a positive 4.
Yes.
Remember when we factor by grouping? The whole key is these have to match. If those don't match, the process hasn't worked, or you've made a mistake or something. Those have to match. Then you write them down. I write down the matching one. Notice I'm not squaring it. I'm not putting 2. I'm just writing it down. Write down the matching factor, and then write down everything else. So I wrote down my matching factor. There it is. And then I wrote down everything else.
So on those kind of problems, they have to match, correct?
Yes.
Or you're doing it wrong, or it's
Yes.
no solution.
You're either doing it wrong or it doesn't factor. Now, what about this? We talked about that. X squared minus 4. What is that? X minus 2. X plus 2. And now we can give our answer. X equals what? Take the opposite of the parentheses. Always, always, always the opposite of the parentheses. So X equals negative 4, positive 2, or negative 2. Now, I'm not putting this on a number line because that's an equals. If you're going to do it on the number line, what would that be? An inequality, a less than, or something like that, right? Shiloh?
Like, beginning when you group it, you keep the negative.
No, you're taking a negative 4 out of both of these. So that becomes positive. And that becomes positive, because I pulled out the negative parts.
Yeah, but then when you divide by -4, what is
I'm just gonna cut it off.
16 divided by -4 is like,
It's negative 16.
how is it -16?
It isn't a problem.
So you keep that negative with the 4x, you don't distribute it in?
Right.
Alright.
Right. I'm not following the question, but you are. Okay, good, good, good. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. They're solving this equation. These are all different kinds of equations that we've done. How do we solve this one? Square both sides. So 3x minus 8 equals 36. Add the 8.
14.
And divide by 3. And that's a perfectly fine answer. You can leave it that way. Now, these are the kind you may remember you really are supposed to check for extraneous roots. So I'm going to do my check. And the problem says 3 times 44 thirds minus 8 is supposed to equal 6. Now, before you start panicking, this is easy. What's 3 times 44 thirds? 44. These cancel. What's 44 minus 8? 36. What's the square root of 36? 6. So that's a good answer. That one checks out. Remember, we've had some where we plugged it back in and it didn't work. Izzy?
If we do we have to check to get full credit?
No. But if you get an answer and it turns out to be extraneous, you're going to put the answer down in the answer blank and it doesn't work and you're going to miss it then. Okay? So the reason you check is because you have no way of knowing if that's a legit answer or not. The process of squaring both sides introduces bad answers. And the only way to know if you got a bad answer is to check. So you take your chances. Sometimes they're fine and you wouldn't need to check, but you just never know.
So if it doesn't equal each other, does that mean that we
For this problem, since there's only one possibility, if it didn't work, you would say no answer, no solution. Sometimes we had them where there have been 2 different answers and one of them worked and the other one didn't. So instead of saying x equals 2 or 4, we said x just equals 2.
Okay.
All right, next, solving again. But this one now has an inequality symbol, which means that we're going to look at a number line because there will be some shading. If there is an inequality, you know there's going to be some shading. All right, how do we start this? We're going to start by factoring it. So how does this one factor?
6, you take 6 and 2.
6 and 2, so
-6.
minus 6 plus 2?
Yep.
What do you think about that? Is that right? If I wasn't sure, if I weren't sure, if I were just kind of guessing here, how would I check myself to make sure I had the right factors? Foil it, right? And when my grade's on the line, I am not going to play the lazy game. I am going to get in there and foil it to make sure. It's right. So 2 dots on the number line, those dots are going to be at positive 6 and negative 2. They'll actually be colored in, right? And now there's going to be some shading.
Those are outside.
Since it's a greater than, I'm going to shade outside. So I'm going to write my answer. X is less than or equal to negative 2.
Can we do the parentheses though?
Yes.
Not parentheses.
I keep answering the same questions. It's still yes. You may use the interval notation if you wish. It's a little more awkward because of the because of the infinities, but you may write it that way. That is the only way to write the answer to this problem in an interval, though. If you try to put negative 2 and 6 in a parentheses, that will be wrong because that describes this section.
That's why I answer like this, like 6.
Cannot do that. Okay, so let's be clear about this. If you have 2 pieces of graph, then you will have 2 pieces of answer. Okay, there is no other way to do it. If there is 1 piece of graph, then you can have 1 piece of answer. But 2 pieces of graph means either 2 pieces this way or 2 pieces this way.
When do we know it's not completed by the square? And like, because we didn't do like the whole 4 and 5 by 2
You
square.
can complete the square to get the zeros of this. You absolutely can. I mean, your whole point is to solve that and get the roots.
Is there a reason why we didn't add 12 to 0?
Yeah, because I factored, and when I factor, I want it set equal to 0. Yeah, quadratic equations need to be set equal to 0.
Can you remind me why you shaded outside?
Okay, anytime it's greater than, it's out.
Okay.
Anytime it's less than, it's in. Okay, next.
We have a problem, it's in the square versus. Will you give us like an option to complete square versus?
If I want you to complete the square, I will tell you to complete the square. If that's my goal, I will tell you to do that. Okay? All right, come on, we gotta keep going. All right, here we go. We have 2 points, and your job is that. That's a distance problem, so that's going to be a radical. And to do the distance, oh my gosh, we practiced this thousands of times, it feels like. To do the distance, what do? Subtract the x's, so 1 minus 6 squared plus negative 2 minus 3 squared. So remember, you're doing x minus x and y minus y. So 1 minus 6 squared would be 25. And negative 2 minus 3 would also be 25 when I squared it.
So it's 25 is the answer.
That's a negative 2 and a negative 3, so that makes negative 5. So this is the square root of 50.
5 square root 2.
Which does break down.
5 root 2.
The last one didn't, but this one does. Yeah, so the answer would be 5 root 2. 5 root 2. Now in that same problem, we also need to find the midpoint. So we're using these 2 same points. How do we find midpoint? Okay, listen to the word midpoint. It's a point. I don't want a fraction, I want a point. And the point is the average. So the average x, 1 plus 6 divided by 2, 7 halves, 3 and a half, 3.5, however you want to write it, doesn't matter. And then the average y, add them, divide by 2, 1/2. So that is your midpoint. You add the x's, divide by 2, add the y's, divide by 2. That is how we find the midpoint. All right, now we're going to write the equation of a couple lines. So A says we've got negative 2, 3, and 2, 15. So we have those 2 points, and we're going to write the equation of that line. So how do we start? We're going to start with finding the slope. Now the slope is a fraction. How do we do that? Y minus y, so 15 minus 3, and 2 minus negative 2. So 15 minus 3 2 minus negative 2, I got a slope of 3.
Yeah.
You're busy.
It's my siblings, probably. All right, now what? So now I'll pick a point. I'll just use this one. It makes no difference. Okay, no difference. And I'll say y minus 3 equals 3x minus negative 2. Now, some of you are forgetting these parentheses here. When you do this, it's y minus 3, or y minus y equals m parentheses x minus x. So y minus 3 equals 3x, that's actually a plus, so plus 6. So y equals 3x plus 9. That would be my slope-intercept form, which is how we normally write our answers. Okay, now the next one is almost the same problem, except we want to be perpendicular to this line and contain that point. So what do I need to do first? I need to get y by itself in this equation. So, why am I doing this? What's the purpose of getting y by itself? I'm going to get the slope, that's right. And I'm going to be really careful as I move things around. I'm going to keep negatives, divide by negatives, whatever. So I got 2x minus 6 as my line. Okay? Now, what's the slope of this line? Slope of this one?
2.
2, right? Slope of this one's 2. If I wanted a parallel line, then I would use 2. But I want a perpendicular line, so I'm going to have to use negative 1/2. So I'm going to use a slope of negative 1/2. And my point is negative 2, 1. So here we go. Same thing as before. Y minus 1 equals negative 1/2 x plus 2. So I'll distribute. Y minus 1 equals negative 1/2 x. What's negative 1/2 times 2?
Negative 1.
Negative 1. Huh. I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and what happens?
Y equals negative half x.
Yep, that's it. That's the answer to the question. All right. Now we got a circle. We want to write the equation of the circle with a center at 6, negative 2, and a radius of 4. This is really easy if you remember what circles look like. What the equation, I mean, I know you know what circles look like, but what the equation looks like. Just remember what it looks like? Sam?
Is x minus 6 squared, and then minus y plus 2 squared equals 16.
Plus y plus 2 squared equals 16. Sam is exactly right. So the equation of the circle has an x thing squared and a y thing squared equal to a number over there. What goes in the parentheses is, of course, the opposite of the center. So that's a 6, negative 2. So this is x minus 6, y plus 2. And what number is over there? The radius squared. Now we're going to simplify. All right, what do you think about this? Your job is to clean that up. What do you think?
Bring y up to the top.
Bring the y squared up to the top. Actually, I'll just cross this out and bring it up there like that, okay? What else do I need to do probably before I get started? I probably need to take care of that, don't I?
1 over 2.
So that's going to be 9x squared y cubed over 6x to the
So
4th.
it'd be 3 over 2. Now you simplify.
So now I can have 3 over 2, that's these guys. What happens with my x's?
X over 2, x2 at the bottom.
X2 at the bottom.
X2 on the bottom. Now why is it X2 on the bottom?
Subtract.
Because there's more x's on the bottom, there's 2 more x's on the bottom, so they go down there, and then your y up here, so then you're done. That's all there is to it. It's overwhelming if you try to do too much at once. Just one thing at a time. Move your negative exponent, take care of your parentheses, and then it's just simplify. All right, now we've got our word problem. I told you I'd give you that formula, there it is. But now you have to customize it for this particular problem. So A says, write the equation for this problem. All right, so what's the equation for this problem going to be? You can use S of t or you can use y, whatever's easiest for you. Doesn't matter. That's function notation. That's the same as y. Negative 16t squared always, plus what? 20t. Do not forget the t. Plus 30. There's the equation for this problem. So that is easy. All you have to do is plug in the initial velocity and the initial height. That's the equation. Now you're going to use that equation
30 feet tall.
to find out when does the ball hit the ground. Well, if the ball is on the ground, how high is it? 0. So you're going to put 0 in for the height. Remember, this is height. This is height. So you're going to put 0 in there and solve this equation. Now, how you solve that is completely up to you. If you want to divide out something, you can do that. Do you have to? No. I'm going to let you use a calculator on this because it's nasty numbers here. But if you want to solve it just like that, you can. If you want to complete the square, hell, God help you. I mean, that would be terrible to complete the square on, but if you wanted to, you could. I think I'm going to use the quadratic formula. And I think before I do, this is Lisa Ford's personal preference. Do whatever you want. But I'm going to divide everything by -2 because it's going to make my number smaller. So 8t squared minus 10t minus 15. I'm dividing everything by -2. I like to have a positive number right there. It's a leftover from my days as a student. I really like to have a positive number, so I'm going to divide it all by -2. You don't have to divide it by anything, and we'll get the same answer. Here we go. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. What have I got there? That's going to become a plus, right?
Yeah. I got 580.
So that's going to be 100 plus 4 times 8.
580.
I got 580. Is that what you got?
Yep.
Okay, so I have my two answers. I'm gonna have two answers here. I'm gonna have 10 plus the square root of 580 over 16, and I'm gonna have 10 minus the square root of 580 over 16. Is everybody clear on that? Two answers? And when I type this in, make sure when you do 10 plus the square root of 580, hit equals, and then divided by 16. So I got 2.13. Did you?
Put a plus here.
And then 10 minus the square root of 580 equals, divided by 16, negative 0.88. Now this is a word problem, so we have to label our answers. So is that 2.13 feet? Is that what is it?
Seconds.
Seconds. And as soon as you put the label on there, something occurs to you.
Negative.
I think that's a bad answer.
So there's only one.
So there's only one answer to this question. When does the ball hit the ground? After 2.13 seconds. Right? 10 plus the square root of 580 equals divided by 16. One more question. How high is the ball? So we're still using this equation right here. We're still using our same equation. How high is the ball after 1.5 seconds? What are you going to do with that 1.5? Plug it into T. Perfect. Isn't 1.5 seconds a time? So of course you're going to plug it into your time variable. So y equals negative 16 times 1.5 squared plus 20 times 1.5 plus 30. So I can just type that in, negative 16 times 1.5 squared plus 20 times 1.5 plus 30. I got 24. Just type it in just like it looks right there. If you just type that in exactly like it looks, you should get 24 unless I made a mistake. And what's the unit on that 24? Feet. Not seconds. Whoa, stop. Read the question. How high is the ball? If I said, how tall are you, would you say 6 seconds? No, you say feet, right? 6 feet. So this is 24 feet. All right, so we just did an entire, that's the test. We just took the test. That's it, okay? Tomorrow, we're going to do 2 more.
Yes.
Friday, I don't see you Thursday. Friday, you take your test. So what I want to do in our remaining time is, we just took the test. So what kind of problems do we need to practice, extra practice, based on what we just did? So think about what we just did. What extra practice do we need? Jalen?
You know, like number 2 is the same thing with the eyes in it. It says 4 plus I minus 3 minus 2 I.
Okay, so he wants to simplify an I situation. So let's do a couple of these. We have this kind of problem, and then we have this kind of problem. All right? So, here we go. Come on, let's listen. You'll get a chance to ask your questions too. Here we go. We're going to simplify here. This is not a FOIL. We're just going to collect like terms. But first we're going to distribute. That negative. So now I can collect like terms and I'll get -3 minus 9i. Easy enough? Now what about this one? This is a division problem.
Multiply it by the opposite of the denominator.
So we're going to multiply the top and bottom by the conjugate of the bottom. And by conjugate, we mean we change that sign, right? Now we got a bunch of foiling to do. This is going to be a big giant foil. So on the top, we're going to do first, outside, inside, last. So first, outside, inside, last. Now when you multiply a -4i times a -5i, you get a positive 20i squared. I know we're going to change that in a minute, but that's what you get. And then on the bottom, first, outside, inside, last. There we go. And what always happens on the bottom? These always cancel, right? So what am I going to be left with on the bottom?
36 minus.
That's a plus 25, so that'll be a 61. Thank you. Now what about the top? Well, what's 20i squared? -20, which combines with the 18, so I have -2. And then all that adds up to -39. This one didn't happen, but remember it does happen occasionally where you'll get an answer like this. And if you get an answer like that, you do have to reduce everything by whatever you can reduce it by. So in this case it would be 4. So I have -1 minus 3i over 4.
Oh, I have another problem.
Okay, so we're done with the i's, okay, Jalen? Okay. Burkhart's had his hand up for half an hour, so I'm gonna call him. What? No, class is over in 8 minutes. Is it okay? I mean, are you gonna get sick or anything? Okay, hang on.
So it's a factoring problem.
So tell me which one, Toby. What problem are you talking about?
I'm talking about 4a.
Alright, so 4a.
Yeah, I was just
Where we
confused.
have to solve, I wanna hear it. Where we have to solve an equation. Alright, so let's x cubed plus 2x squared minus 9x minus 18. Alright, so let's take a look at this. So the directions say solve. Okay, there's a whole bunch of terms up there. Are we going to use the quadratic formula on this? No, it's a cube. You can't. You can only do quadratic formula if it's a square. So what did we say we were going to do to kind of break this up? We're going to look at, we're going to group it, right. So there are my two groups. And so in the first group, I can take out an x squared, and I'll be left with x plus 2. That's my first group. In the second group, I'll take out a -9, and that will leave me with x plus 2, which is great news because if I'm factoring by grouping, these have to match, and they do. So I write it down, and then I write down everything else. So if I take those out, Everything else is x squared minus 9. And what's special about x squared minus 9?
Oh, x plus
It factors
x plus 3,
into
x minus 3.
x plus 3, x minus 3. And then I can say my answers are the opposite of what's in the parentheses. So -2, -3, and 3. All right, Toby?
Yep.
All right. Who else has got one? Something else
Can we
from
do one
the...
of the inequalities where we graph?
Yeah.
More of those.
So our inequalities, we always put on the number line, because there's shading. Anytime you have an inequality, you're going to have some kind of shading. So let's try, so let's try this. So this is an absolute value, but it's got a 3 here that really shouldn't be there. So we'll divide everything by 3 to start with. Then we can go straight to the number line. There's nothing else to do. We can go straight to the number line. And right in the middle, we're going to start with the middle number here, +4. And we know we're going to have dots on each end. And those dots will be found by counting 2 both ways. So 2 this way would be 6. 2 this way would be 2. And then we either shade between the dots or outside the dots. Since this is a greater than, we will shade outside the dots.
No, yeah, aren't they?
And the dots are colored in. And now I'll write my answer. So I'll either say x is less than or equal to 2, or x is greater than or equal to 6. That would be one way to write the answer. Or if you want to use your infinities, you can do that. So we have -infinity to 2, bracket, or bracket 6 to +infinity. Either one of those would be perfectly okay. All right, got time for one more. What's one more problem from the practice test that we need to?
With simplify,
Simplify?
where it's like the 3x squared.
Okay, so let's have so here we go. We've got kind of a mess here. Let's simplify this and see what we can come up with. So let's take care of some things first. How about this parentheses here? What happens to that? 16x to the 6th. Very good. Now, if you're a little concerned about how do you get x to the 6th, stop and think. X cubed squared means x cubed times x cubed, doesn't it? That's what squaring means. So we have 3 x's and 3 x's. That's a total of 6 x's. Y to the 5th. 8x to the 5th. And what about this guy? He goes up, so we actually have a y to the 7th up there on top. So what happens now? Well, that becomes 2 over 1, right? X on top, because 6 is bigger than 5, right? 1 bigger than 5, so you have 1 extra one up there. And then all together, we have 12 y's. So you don't even really need the 1 down there. wouldn't hurt anything, but really that's how it comes out. Okay, so now you know exactly